But I'm going to also go back here and talk about cloning, because if this is a site, if we actually built the application for you, going forward, anytime you build an application form, you'll be more than likely cloning the application that we've already built for you. And so cloning an application, what it does is it takes an existing application and makes an exact replica of that application. So everything that was in that original application build, so all the questions, all the sections, all the pre-qualifications, all the different messages we're going to talk about in the application settings, any of your email notification templates that you've made. If you have a one-to-many process where there's funds tied to your application and a bunch of criteria built for those funds, all of that rolls with the cloning process, even the reports, even your review tasks, everything that comes over with that application. So going forward from year to year, you'll be doing a rollover more than likely of your existing application, and you'll be using the cloning process to do that. So I'm going to focus more on the cloning, since if it's your training based off of us helping you do your implementation. We'll talk about the cloning. And when we open up the next page, those of you who are building your own application, is going to be the exact same page. The only difference is what I just showed you with the create new application. You're going to have a blank slate, but when you're cloning, you're going to have items populated. But I'm still going to touch on what each of those items are in the build. So when you clone an existing application, you simply click the Clone Existing Application button. And then the first step is to pick the template that you wish to clone. So I'm just going to pick a quick template here. And then you'll notice as soon as I pick that template, then the next item here, this is where you would start with creating a new application. You're going to have that funding name. You're going to give it a name. And of course, anytime you're cloning, you would have to give it a unique name so that the system knows that this is the new version. So this is the name of the application that the applicants are applying to. And then you have the sponsoring organization. That's the organization, which would more than likely be you, that is responsible for maintaining this specific application form. And then the description is something only you see. So this is something the applicants do not see. So you can enter a description so that when you're looking at that application, you know what the purpose of that application form is all about. And then this button here, does the application have a deadline? So there's a couple of different options with the application process. If I was to change this to no, you're going to notice some of these items down here changing. So if I was to say no to this application having a deadline, this would be what the majority of our clients, even some of our grant users, not the majority, but some of our clients, very few don't have a deadline, but you may have an application that's rolling. I know our grant users, sometimes you open up your grant process the first of the year, and then at the end of the year you may close it out, or you may have grants that are small funded grants that you leave open all the time. So if you do not have a deadline, then of course you don't have any of the deadline start and stop dates. However, something that does come into play, which I'll talk about in just a second here, is the academic year. So this is, if you remember in the fund setup, when we were talking about fund setup, we talked about academic year. The grant site, you're going to have what's called let me show you here. You're going to have what's called a fiscal year. It's just the same field, same functionality, just has a different name on your grant site. So if you have a rolling application, then this academic year is going to have some major functionality on your application. Now, if you have a rolling application, we also recommend, if at all possible, if you have deadline no, at least at the end of each year, maybe close out that application and then clone it and then create a new one for each New Year's cycle. And that would be your academic year, whatever your year ending would be. Close it out, starting the new fiscal period, academic period, start a new application process. And that way it's easier to keep track of your applications from year to year. You still have that funding source, and in that funding source you would just roll the academic year, attach the new application, and then you would have a whole new academic year to start with from year to year. So that's kind of if you do not have a deadline. Now, if you have a deadline, which is what the majority of our clients do have, they do have deadlines on the application process. And so you'll notice when I select the deadline yes, then you have the option. Then the next thing is for the date and time, the different types of deadlines. So we do have a few different types that you can have. So the majority of our clients use date and time specific. Date and time specific means on such and such date at such and such time, this application will go be turned off, and applicants will no longer be able to apply to it after that time. And then we also have a number of days from the time application is started. So if you do have a rolling application, maybe you don't want applicants starting that application then sitting on it forever. Maybe you want to put a time limit on how many days from the time they start they have to complete that application. And so that's what this deadline number of days from the time application is started is all about. Then you can come here and say maybe you can do 90, you can do any number of days. This isn't the drop down, this is just something that my computer is picking up. If you wanted it to be maybe 120 days after the time that the application started, you put that there. And so what it is as soon as they start their application, they log into that dashboard. That's when the timer starts. It would look at however many days, 120 days I have here, and that would be when it would tell the applicant they have to complete it. Then after 120 days from the day they start, it would be turned off and they would no longer be able to apply with that access. And then the other one is number of days from the time application invitation is sent. So we do have a private application process. If you have a private application, you can go ahead and use a normal deadline, or maybe you're inviting applicants at different phases. And so maybe one starts at another time, and then maybe another one, and then another one. Since they're coming in at different times, maybe you want to give them different deadlines. So this would be from the time you send the invitation inviting them to the application, that would be the number of days they have to complete that application, and that's what you would put here. So I'm just going to go ahead and go into date and time specific. And as I'm going through here, you're going to notice this is a cloned application. So when you clone an application, one of the key things you want to do is make sure that anything that is part of the prior application that you clone this from, you're updating with that new application's information, especially date information. You want to make sure all of it's for the new application. And then of course, if you're creating an application, you don't have to worry about that, but you want to make sure that you're getting the correct items for that. And then of course the academic year, notice it does say auto here. So what it does is based on the start date here, so this is the day that you're starting application forms. And you'll notice even when you don't have a deadline, it does also still force you to put a start date. This is the day that the application goes live that you allow applicants to apply to. I'm going to change this back to yes for deadline. And then when you have a deadline, it then is what is the deadline date? So this is the day that the application the applicants can no longer apply to it. And then along with that is the time the time that the application goes offline. And so 12 a.m. would mean 12 a.m. the morning of June 9th. So if you want that to be the evening of June 9th, then you would want to make that 11:59 p.m. so that it goes off at 11:59 p.m. and then they would no longer be able to apply to it. Now this time zone here, this comes from the site settings based off of our site settings that we set up initially in the administration tab up there at the top. There's that administration tab. Site settings has your time zone, so that's where that's coming from. But then back up here to this academic year, it's going to look at the start date and the deadline date. It's going to go into the administration manage academic fiscal year grants. You have fiscal year. And it's going to say, okay, this start date and this deadline date fall within X academic fiscal period. And then it's going to automatically here pick up the fiscal period that it falls in. Now, some of our clients remember, this is the awarding period. The award, what did you set the funding source that's tied to this app, that's going to be tied to this application? What was the fiscal period you set to that? It's going to set it automatically, but you can always come here and override it. So maybe it's not going to be your 20. This one right now would say it's my 2020, 2021. Maybe I want it to be my 21, 22. I can override it with this by selecting that. Otherwise, if I leave it at auto, it's going to go ahead and select something. And you can always go back in and adjust it. It's just once you start awarding that it really is crucial. Before you award, you've got the academic year on the application is matching the academic year of when you're awarding. Don't get this confused of, well, I'm taking applications during this year. This is the awarding period. This is the dates that you're actually awarding the applicants for. Okay. The day that your bookkeeping, your general ledgers, that the period that money's coming out of your general ledger that you're allocating the funding for with your accounting department. Okay, so that's the deadline times, and that's the academic year. And then, of course, if you have a rolling application, you would want to roll your fund forward each year, and then you would also want to roll the application forward to the next academic year to make sure that those are in sync. The fund always has to be in sync. The next item is the logout URL. So this is when an applicant has accessed the application, they're in that application dashboard, and they hit log out. Where do you want to take them? The majority of our clients actually have them revert back to their website. So you can go have them go back to your website. You can have them go back to the login page to where they when they first came to the site, that page, that application listing page, whatever you have the setting set on in the system, so that when they access this URL for our site, then they are directed to that. But like I said, the majority of our clients tend to use their website and direct them back to the page where they've provided the link to the application process. And then the reply to, so in our email templates, we do have the system, if someone was to click the reply button, it would automatically reply to admin@communityforce.com and go out into our server world and never to be accessed by anyone. So if you want to provide a reply to, you can enter a reply to email in here. And then when applicants do reply to emails, then it would go to that individual instead of our Communityforce admin account. The applicant minimum age, the majority of grant users, you're not going to have a minimum age. However, scholarships sometimes do have a minimum age. And what the system does is it looks at the current date the applicant is applying. And if I was to put a minimum age here of, say, 18, saying as of today's date, they have to be 18 in order to apply for this application process. And it's going to look at the current date, and they have to be 18 at that current date. That's how the system's looking at it. It's going to look at, if you remember, when an applicant creates a profile, scholarships only, organizations you don't have date of birth, so this is why this is just scholarships only. So the profile they create, they enter a date of birth. So that date of birth, the system will look at the date of birth and determine if the applicant is 18 years old at the time of starting the application. And if they're not, then you'll notice as soon as I populated this with the figure, this acknowledgement box appeared, and this is where you would put the message to the applicant letting them know they are not eligible to apply based on their age, and they would have to wait till they were of X age. You would create an instructional message here and a message acknowledging why they weren't eligible. And then of course if I change this back to 0 and hit into the next field, you'll notice that acknowledgement went away. Application form cost. Some of our clients actually require a cost for their application forms. And so if you are using that, then of course it does require a special setup in regards to linking to your third-party payment gateway. And so here is where you would put that monetary amount, and then we would help build that payment gateway question and then connect the interface to the payment gateway provider, software provider that you would be using to collect that fee. But if you were collecting a fee, this is where you would put it. And then as soon as you activate this, in some of the report fields, there would be a form cost and whether they've paid or not. That would activate all of that by entering a figure here. But if we keep it 0, then that will, there won't be a fee associated with that. And this is also a site setting that is turned on when a form cost is required. Enable pre-qualification. So if you have pre-qualification questions that are being set up on the site, so those are yes or no combo questions. We'll talk about how those are built here in a minute. But if you do have pre-qualification questions, then you would select yes to make sure that those are turned on. If this was no, when the applicants came to the site, started the application, they would not get those pre-qualification questions. And then the enable view matching funding, if you have a one-to-many where you have one application, multiple funding sources, and you are having applicants be matched to those funding sources, you would want to turn this on to yes. And a lot of these are settings that when you've done your onboarding with us, we've gone through and asked you key questions in regards to how these should be set up. But this training is nice because now you understand what they do, how they function. You're not just seeing the question on a form and answering yes or no, I want that. You're actually seeing what it does. And then this enable option to opt in or out for funding, that is something that you more than likely will not be using. If it is something that we set up for you, we will assist you and give you more information at the time. Enable multiple submissions. The majority of scholarship users do not have multiple submission. However, grant sites, you more than likely will allow multiple submissions, yes. You'll want multiple submissions to be turned on because with grant users, remember this is grants, not scholarships, grant users, you have organizations applying for programs. And if you allow an organization to apply multiple times for different programs, then you want to have the enable multiple submission turned on as yes. The reason I say majority of this information is for grant users is because scholarships, you more than likely just want the applicant doing one application. You don't want them doing one, starting another one, doing another one, doing it, and then you have all these applications for this one applicant. You do not more than likely want multiple submissions turned on. However, grant users, if you allow applicants to apply multiple times, then you would want multiple user turned on. The next two features, Collaborator and Proxy, I'm going to focus on our grant site. If you're a scholarship user, you can listen in, of course, but this is also something that's mostly used by grant sites. So enable collaborators allows, and you'll notice, enable collaborators allows you to have your applicants collaborate with other individuals. Those individuals have access to sections that only the applicant gives them access to. Any section in their application form. So I can be the applicant, I can start my application. I might come to a section, say my finance section. I need assistance from my finance account manager to complete that section. I'm not sure how to answer some of those questions. So if you have collaboration turned on, I, as the applicant, can go to the system, create a user account for that individual. Then once I create their account, I can then say, okay, I want to give them access to my financial section. They give them access to that section. The individual gets an email. They log in. They have a tab called My Collaborated Sections. They access it. They click that tab, and then they see the applicant's dashboard and the section that they've been collaborated on. They complete the section, but then nothing happens with the applicant. They don't know they completed it, so that person would have to tell them that they've completed that section. That's collaboration. And then the applicant can't submit until everything's completed in full. And then the applicant can make changes, they can see it, they can do whatever with collaboration. Proxy is I'm an organization and I have maybe someone in my organization, I tell them, go ahead and create an account for me, log in as a proxy and start the application for me, and then I'll finish it later. You can have maybe an assistant or an administrative assistant or someone in your organization start the application for you, but then create your user account and then notify you that they've started the application on your behalf. And that's what the proxy is. And then when you log in, the applicant logs in, the organization, they have access to that. And you do have to have multiple submission turned on. You'll notice if I turn it off, that proxy goes away. And then also when these are activated, the proxy, let me turn this back on, yes. And then proxy, yes. If you have proxy activated, they'll get a screen that it says apply for yourself or apply on behalf of someone else. If they're the proxy, they would say behalf of someone else. And there's also instructions that are activated when you activate them here. So those are key things that are for grant users only. Scholarship users, you have that. If you do have a need to it, activate them, but more than likely with scholarships, you will not activate that. The only time with collaborators where you might want to activate it is maybe the applicant might want to have their parent assist them in regards to answering some of the questions. However, you would not know that the parent is the one completing those. With collaboration, you don't know exactly who's doing it exactly. So with scholarships, a lot of times you'll do these nomination sections. So I talked about request sections earlier back. And so nomination sections are what the majority of our scholarship users use. Instead of collaborators, they're using nomination. So a nomination is an applicant comes to a section, it's called a request section, and they have to nominate someone to complete that section. However, that is a blind section to the applicant. The applicant cannot see that section. They cannot access that section. And so this single multiple means if you have more than one of those, so if you have like 5 letters of recommendation, then that would be multiple nominations. But this multiple means if I have 5 letters of recommendation this applicant needs, do you want them to only invite one person to do all 5 of them, single? Or do you want to allow them to do multiple invites, multiple people, one person per each section? That would be multiple. Majority of our scholarship users use multiple. I have yet to see one that has a single. And then, of course, like I said, with grant, sometimes you do nomination sections for, you want the executive director's signature. The person's coming in isn't the executive director. You require the executive director. You don't want the person completing it, signing it. So you want to create that private nomination section where they have to invite the executive director to sign it. Or it's a fiscal sponsorship. You don't want them completing the fiscal sponsorship. You want the fiscal sponsor completing it. You don't want the applicant to have access to that, so you can do a nomination form. And then we also have enable editing after submitting. This is more than likely set to yes, or I mean no. And so what this does is, do you want the applicants to be able to edit after they submit their application? Enable editing says you're saying yes, they can. No, you do not want them to make changes. And then you also can set this on the section level. Then we also have show applicant to committee. So when you are doing your review process, so scholarship users, this is going to affect a lot of you. If you have a blind review process, meaning when you get to the review process and you assign your applicants, you don't want your reviewers to have access to see in reports the names of the applicants, you want that to be private, then you would say no, do not show their name. Now that's just in reports. When we're building the actual application, we have to also hide any identifying questions like their first name, their last name. Those actual questions that are being built, those would have to be hidden within the question itself. Same with the section. On the section level, we can hide the entire section so they can't see anything identifying. This is just on the reporting aspect. They would see a number and not the applicant's name. And then here, show application to committee, if you have a review process, they need to see the application, you want this set to yes. And this is the same for grants as well, that you would have that turned on. Display reviewer task comments. If you want reviewers to see each other's tasks across all of your reviews, you want every reviewer to see how every other reviewer scored applicants, you can put this to yes. If you want applicants, this is one you want to use caution. If you want applicants to see the reviewer's scores and how they scored them, they would know who the reviewer was and how they were scored, you can mark this as yes. Majority of the people probably want this as no. And then published, you will want to let this default to yes. If you have an agency, if you're an agency and you have several funds on your site and you have several departments, maybe you're creating the application, you don't want other people to see it just yet, then you can put this as no, meaning internally. But the majority of our clients, I always want this to be yes. If you don't have this at yes, when you're going to the funding source or anywhere in the system as an admin, you won't be able to find this application in the listing. So this you want to default to yes. And this is a button that can be turned off in site settings if you don't want to see it here. But some people want to be able to control this, so that is here for illustrative purposes today. And then the final item here, instructions. These are the instructions to the applicant when they come to the dashboard. They open up their dashboard and they're now in these instructions. And so this is where those instructions are housed and where you can make changes to them if you want to change the message. And then once you're done here, you just go ahead and hit save and exit. And then once you hit save and exit, it will then return you to the home page where you will see that application form. And now you're ready to begin building the remaining elements of that application. Now remember, we cloned an application, so once we clone it, everything from that other application is going to be coming over. And you'll also notice right now the fund is not tied to this application.